to TWOgether, and once again, a thrilling episode with my friend Bill Mew. We will talk again about US-Asian trade conflicts. Bill.
Well, in our first episode, we covered an enormous amount about the trade war tactics that are going on. We touched on the fact that there were certain parallels between what happened with the automotive sector as that started to eclipse the US as the Japanese automotive manufacturers became more powerful, with the parallels we're seeing now in the Chinese arena with the Chinese tech firms. I spoke a lot about what I saw in this particular arena and the parallels. What are the parallels that you see?
Well, one of the things that I see, and I've noticed that for a couple of years already, is that there is always this unbalance between what the US corporations want and do and what US governments want. Now, in the automotive industry, when Japan was getting up to speed with their car exports, two things happened. The United States government tried to control it with tariffs, with all kinds of controls, with limits. And the US companies were rushing over to Japan to figure out how those Japanese were doing that. We inherited the Toyota production system, Six Sigma, lean manufacturing, all those variations that we had. Even at one point, we came up with the Agile Manifesto. Those are all things that happened because we were so envious of how Japan and Japanese car manufacturing were doing that. We have copied it. We abused it a little bit. We made our own variations. So that was what the United States corporations were doing, including the automotive industry. It is very interesting to see that if you go to name them, I don't want to make any kind of advertisement, but go to any kind of automotive manufacturer in the United States or any kind of supplier, you will see the Toyota production system. They will send their people to training for Six Sigma. They're proud when they are a black belt Six Sigma champion. They took that from the Japanese. And you see something similar now happening with the US-Asian trade conflict. The government is all about, and especially this administration, is all about the jobs which were stolen or the jobs which were sold by Obama or whatever the reason is. But the United States companies and the United States consumers prefer the significantly lower cost coming out of Asia. They prefer that a lot of the innovative stuff that they currently have comes from China. So there is a significant difference, an unbalance, so to speak, between what the government is trying to enforce and what the corporations and what the shareholders of those corporations and the board of directors and all the executives and even the consumers want to happen. And that is not a simple puzzle, Bill.
Of course, the technology manufacturers in the US, from Apple to all the PC manufacturers to the networking equipment manufacturers and everyone, they are free to purchase components and equipment from anywhere in the world. Wow. They have chosen to buy most of their components from China until, that is, the restrictions started to be made on the likes of Huawei and others.
There's something else, Bill.
Yeah.
There's something else. Mr. Trump, and maybe his reign will be over soon, but Mr. Trump has already stated when he asked when US companies would, despite all tariffs and restrictions, continue to buy in Asia, how would he respond? And he said literally, he is not going to wait when needed. He will impose tariffs and penalties on US companies which purchase and manufacture in Asia. So if his reign would continue, it might even be that he would try to enforce US companies to buy in the US and take away their freedom to do what they see as the best solution. So it's more than just that.
Well, with Mr. Trump currently, as we record here, complaining that there will be a realization of the fact that the election's been stolen from him, and obviously a smooth transition to the next Trump administration, maybe we'll get to see what the next phase would be in his idea of trade tactics with China. But I think ultimately that attempt to retain power may fail, and that will open the doors to a new administration and a new ideas. And I think we'll come on to cover that in the future when we get a little bit more of an idea about which direction the new administration is going in. But at the moment, we have some thorny issues and some big problems that Biden is going to inherit from Trump. And one of them is centered in Ottawa. Tell us a little bit more about what's happening in Ottawa.
Well, in Ottawa, we see a very interesting development. There are basically two sides of this story. We're talking about the CFO of Huawei being arrested in Canada while she was in transit to Mexico. That is based on an accusation of not completely informing HSBC and thereby putting HSBC at risk of breaching sanctions. It's very far-fetched, especially when you look at the data of...
Is HSBC speaking out and accusing Huawei and its CFO of having hoodwinked it?
There are some statements, but there's not hard wording in it. That's a very interesting part. So although they deny it, you get the impression that there is an arrangement between HSBC and the US government. I'm not saying that's the case, but it points in that direction. And one of the things which is very interesting is that all the key information which Huawei provided about their relation to Skycom is not mentioned in that case. So if I would mention Bill Mew yesterday drank beer and then say, well, it was only one, and then he waited for 3 hours and then he got back into his car, take that part out and say, Bill Mew was drinking beer yesterday and got into his car, I might give the impression to the audience that you were drinking and driving. And where in reality...
We've got some fairly tenuous circumstances here in which somebody has been arrested in Ottawa on the basis that they're going to be extradited. Surely this executive was on a connecting flight through Ottawa, and therefore there shouldn't necessarily have been any immigration checks or any need for her to be questioned.
What is interesting is that she is a resident of Ottawa. So it is very interesting that she gets arrested. Or, well, that's the first thing we need to discuss. She doesn't get arrested immediately. She gets questioned first by an immigration check. And although she is a resident of Ottawa at that moment, with social insurance, with ID card, etc., and on a transit flight to Mexico, she gets questioned. And that questioning is not 5 minutes. That questioning is very intense. It takes 3 hours. During this questioning, she's asked to hand over her mobile devices, her technology, provide passwords so they can check. And then after 3 hours, she is arrested. Now, all that information from the questioning by the Border Patrol is collected and alleged to be sent over to the FBI. And there are confirmations in the press and during the current hearings of witnesses. They confirm that this information was handed over. They confirm that there have been direct contacts between the FBI and the Border Police. That's not a normal arrest. And very interesting in this case, Bill, is that one of the Border Police officers who has been interviewed last week confirmed that he was aware that this is not according to rule, and confirmed that he was aware that this is a breach of the charter in Canada, which would apply if you would be arrested, because being arrested is something entirely different than just being questioned.
Well, I'm not about to defend the status of civil rights in China or what is going on in Hong Kong at this very moment in time, because that's a different topic entirely. But in the West, we set ourselves a different set of standards that we seem to live by. It would seem unusual in the extreme if an executive who was in transit through a Western airport was stopped in this way. It would be unusual in the extreme if somebody flying into a country where they were resident was stopped and questioned in this way. It would be unusual in the extreme if somebody was questioned for a number of hours without legal representation before even being told that they were being arrested and what they were being arrested for, And it would also be unusual in the extreme if somebody was asked during this questioning process for the password to their phone and their computer, and this was then kept by the people who later told her she was arrested and then handed it on to the authorities in another country who had requested her extradition. Now, all of these things are unusual in the extreme. I think if we're talking about another Western city, if we were talking about London here, and Heathrow is a major hub, Amsterdam is another one. I mean, there are any number of airport hubs. If this sort of thing were to happen regularly with senior business executives in transit through a particular hub, using any one of the sort of regular airline hubs that you might use for a transit flight, or if you were flying into a city where you were resident and you were treated in this way, I think people would be up in arms. And I think especially if this happened to American executives when they were traveling abroad, the American authorities would be absolutely apoplectic.
Absolutely.
How China reacting? I believe that they're contesting things in the courts in Ottawa. How are things getting on?
Well, so far the results are that there are confirmation from key witnesses who confirm that this at least was not according to the rules, according to the book. And there has been several attempts to block this witness hearing, and the judge has overruled this so far. So the judge is basically allowing the Huawei defense attorneys to continue this line. So apparently the judge also believes that there is at least reason to hear the ones who were present, what happened and why they did what they did. So that's at least a positive sign, right?
Well, we're talking here about an American president who domestically has broken all of the norms that existed and shocked people across the globe with some of his behavior. Also, as we described in the last episode, breaking all the norms in the sort of World Trade Organization rules and the way it is pursuing trade tactics. And now we're seeing the same administration breaking all the rules in terms of how you treat senior business executives flying through different terminuses in terms of international travel. All of this looks desperately suspect.
Beyond suspect, Bill, I would say. I want to take it one step further. At the moment, we have the situation that the United States stepped away from the global agreement, I would almost say, with Iran, which was signed, I think, 2-3 years ago. The European Union says, no, we're sticking with that agreement. We made an agreement, and they have the tendency, well, maybe except for the UK, they have the tendency to stick with the agreements reached. The United States canceled that, stepped away from it. What if you are a European company and your executive who is doing business with Iran according to that treaty, according to that agreement, travels to the United States, gets arrested because the United States stepped away from that treaty and now is convinced that you have broken sanctions, and or gets you arrested in any other country? I think that a lot of people would be upset, but on the other hand, with this current administration, it would not even surprise me if they would do it, because apparently we see it escalate further and further and further. And this is something where it's not just from my perspective a matter of who is the president of the United States, it's also a matter of, do we as non-United States citizens and countries and governments and bodies of regulation, how long are we going to accept this? How long are we going to accept that there is a country or a president who apparently thinks that they don't have to play by the rules, or they can make up their own rules and the others have to follow that?
I think this is a part of a broad trend of exceptionalism, treating the current Huawei CFO in this way when the US would be apoplectic if the same treatment came with any traveling US executive. Expecting Iran to abide by a treaty that the US themselves have exited, and in many others, quite often the US argues that people should be pursued through the international criminal courts when the US have actually not signed up to the International Criminal Court in order to make sure they're exempt. And they complain that the Chinese in the South China Sea are not abiding by the UN regulations for the seas, when actually the US hasn't actually signed up to that treaty itself because it doesn't want to have to abide by it. So in all of these incidences, these are situations where the US is seeking to apply rules on others that it would not accept being applied to itself.
I found this wonderful example last month or 2 months ago, Bill, when the United States is celebrating that they are imposing tariffs on the European Union over Boeing, and that is authorized by the World Trade Organization. And within 3 days, they are complaining because the World Trade Organization had ruled that the tariffs on China are not according to World Trade Organization ruling, and therefore China would be entitled to have counter tariffs. That's the United States, I think. I think it sums that up, or at least this administration.
Okay, well, I live in hope that things will actually moderate. I hope that we can have a cessation of the trade war that's happening and actually some decent negotiations to try and reach a collaborative solution, because I don't think tariffs and trade wars do anyone any benefit. It's not to the benefit of the Chinese, it's not to the benefit of the Americans, and it's not to the benefit of the rest of the world either. And I also hope that as the US realizes that its dominance economically is not what it once was, that it actually starts to see the benefit in having organizations such as the World Trade Organization, the World Health Organization even, to actually provide a level of coordination, even playing field, such that everyone can collaborate, cooperate, and compete. And we need to have healthy competition, but on an equal and fair basis.
Bill, I think that is a wonderful message of hope by which we can end this episode. I know you and I are not going to solve it, but we are looking forward to at least a better future. Thank you, Bill.
Let's hope.